So to MFD of Ian Chapter Fad, August to Plé-phainéil of Ian Gap loan to loan her 5 Fosta, August MFD Gap Ihe, so totally car over dull or Malak Amak, August Ganhilly William to make all Stephen Cannell, a car or latter, a bit of Mhic or in Fana. My lord or my Okay,
well, Neil is to feel more in a rad hearing you to make your intro gallant to show and over young do, so I'm not going to say too much. I'm going to let these three do the hard work. But while I'm in panel occur ever latter, reduce better to Andrée Murphy again as Malaclia or do shop book Tionchar and Gníomhú Cahar. Wahar of the Shan Wahar, Delia Cretchfield or Shan Wahar in Boston, August last year her relatives for justice. Agus Nyart Talm Eki Fosta Screaming She Colin Shaftanel Den Andy News. Agus Simona Erlay it's a public feminist feminist August in CLG Wallaclea well we need to curry maternity and so I'd like to welcome Andrée Murphy to our panel. As I mentioned there, she's a mother and a grandmother, believe it or not, and also she is the Deputy Director of Human Rights Group Relatives for Justice. And she's moved here in 1994, but she still holds her passion for Dublin GAA, but we'll try not to hold that. So Andrée, let's have it. And she'll take Colma the Aoidh of the show mBan as Gaeltach over show. Plan City or Cumberland Kate Plana over show in Gaeltach over show in Egypt, Chaska and Mhic. Agus bhí si gur imas an chéad drama le freastal ar one scoil fphobal first. One is she in Gael Kersey in Gabilas sa chéide le Birch Fostithe agus Fithe Dalta sin ceart, yeah. Agus inis tá breis agus trí chéad Dalta an agus Cheshire Fornia, so my hair sin écht ar dói. So Colma the Ian Shaw from the Shaw's Road Gaeltacht, and we're really delighted to have her here. She was from one of the first families to set up in the Shaw's Road Gaeltacht, and in 2011 founded Gael Kersey, which provide courses for Gaelic speakers and also help employers as well to find Irish speakers whenever they're looking for staff. Started with 20 students and 2 members of staff, and now have more than 300 students and 6 members of staff, so it's a great achievement. So Paul Sherwood, a Colma. Agus Jerry or Fad to Ashley Labhraí and Shaw again in our latter Arish as Forbairt agus firstly Indigenous or Fad with Trivani Yilligan Monscoil Forbairt and Chin Monscoil First Marby Polish First Anish. When she came literally up the Yilligan agus Verla agus ear came in Sachan Daliacht into special or Fad. Agus an sin caiisi couple of blian mar forgot Indigenous in our museum na Hearn in Wallaclea. Agus an sin mog she to London le bheith Marwanisher MFD in British Museum Fosta. Hannig siar ash to Belfast le bheith over the culture and actual Sheenish mar Stuart. So Ashling again is from Belfast. Got her education through the Irish medium sector in Pobail First and also in Mansfield First, which is now Gníomhú College First, as you know. And then spent a bit of time in Dublin working in the museum there and then in the British Museum in London as well. But we're delighted to have her back on home turf. She's now one of the executive director of Cultural on our over the wall. So what's wrote So my movement to a flavour Conor her man Forbairt grief of the Athrú couple. So we're going to talk about women's impact of community change, development and activism. So we're just by a couple of moments you've worked to Goth Blad and Fana. You know, Tionchar Activism, a current moving focal or cliche healing shades and we topic all war shows. So I'm going to give you ladies a couple of minutes per person just to give your ideas around the topics that we're discussing today. Andrée,
thanks a million, and thank you all for this. Even though I've dropped off my side outside and picked her up, I haven't been in since. This is a really nice opportunity to come in and explore a wonderful facility. When I was asked by Rona to do this actually last year, and I wasn't able to do it last year, and I'm delighted that I am able to do it this year. I find it really challenging because it's one of those topics that really my heart and soul is in, but when you try to sit down and figure out, well, what is it I'm going to bubble out and try and say about women and activism and community development, there's so much to say that it all kind of bubbles out at once. So forgive me if all this sounds like a bit of bubbling. as Kiva said, I moved up in 1994, and when I came up, it really reminded me of where I grew up in Dublin, and particularly when I lived in town, because there was so much one related to the other. And I'll explain that a little bit as I'm talking, and I'll also try and explain about why I feel that women's activism in Belfast completely redefined my view of what feminism could be and should be as we did it. So I suppose there's lots of lip service given to women's involvement in community development and what they do, but there's very little interrogation of what that actually means. It's usually like an acknowledgement of women that's sideways rather than why we actually do value women and the work that they do. And what, you know, the difference that women make when they are involved and doing the work that we know that women do, why that's special and why we need to notice it first of all and then value it. And there's even less written about working class women's and activism. But the first thing I want to say is that we shouldn't essentialise that, because sometimes what happens is that women are projected as being peacemakers, as being, you know, their hearts are in the home and therefore they bring a special value, really essentialising, you know, the role of women rather than recognising that women during our conflict were involved in armed actions, women were prisoners, women were supportive of the military struggle, some of them, and other women were involved in peacemaking, kind of in inverted commas, which was valued. But the working class women who were active on the ground and making a difference on the ground were often written out and not valued. And part of that was a class bias, and a lot of it was an anti-Republican bias, but that certainly did happen during that time. And when you see that during our conflict, then you see that even today, about which women's voices are valued or recognised as the feminist voices we want to hear. So, you know, there's something about the working class and there's something about Republican voices as well. So, and I think that you still see that a lot in terms of women's debates today. The thing that made me want to be involved in women's politics, and I can remember it as clear today as the day that it happened. I grew up in a place called Tala in Dublin, which is on the outskirts of it. And at that stage, in the late 1980s, you lived in a house. There were loads of houses, but there were no shops, right? And there were very few buses, and if you wanted to get to a shop, you had to take a bus to go. So one day, I'm on the bus, and there's a woman, and she's struggling. She has a baby in a buggy, she has a toddler, and even the footpaths didn't take you to the bus stop, right? So that took you to the shop that was, I think, 4 miles away. And so she was struggling across really mucky grass with her buggy, with her baby, and you know, she didn't have money to access taxis or cars. Nobody did. You didn't have mobile phones, and you were, you know, every day was kind of a struggle. But politicians didn't notice her, didn't notice her children, or any of us who were on that bus in particular, right? So that made me go, you know, when politics is talked about, people like us aren't there. We're not visible, and she certainly wasn't visible. And that's when I came to Belfast. I noticed, particularly in Twinbrook, there was something about that. When footpaths don't go to the places that people need to go to access the public transport that is barely existent for them, it tells you a lot about the people who make decisions about people's lives. The other thing when I came to Belfast was, you know, who was addressing those kind of issues? And at the time, you absolutely have a hero sitting here with Mary Ann Wright in terms of the women who were making a difference in their community during those years. You had other women who were addressing those really how you live your life issues, right? So Ruth Tynan, Eileen Howell, Geraldine McAteer, Tish Holland, who was buried only last week, Annie Armstrong, just very few of those women weren't essentialising women at all, looking at their ordinary lives and trying to find ways to make a difference, to make practical differences in women's lives, and also contributing to a burgeoning and emerging peace process. They were extraordinary, and they were fighting tooth and nail for working class communities and working class women. But they're not names you hear in the discourse that's done on maybe the mainstream media around women who were involved in politics during those years. Who founded the first ex-prisoners centre? It was Carol Cullen, right? So, and she changed how we viewed prisoners' issues. It wasn't about the conditions that the male prisoners usually were experiencing inside the prisons. She was talking about prisoners' families. how they were being supported, and ex-prisoners and whether there were support systems in place for them. So it was a change in even the discussion about how we support people. And it was really a feminist approach as well. And who pushed victims in our community? And it was Emma Groves and Clara Riley. And Emma and Clara, their story is absolutely remarkable. So Emma was shot with a rubber bullet and was blinded. Clara saw somebody being killed with a plastic bullet, and they founded the United Campaign Against Plastic Bullets and worked with the families who were bereaved and those injured through the use of plastic bullets. They travelled to Moscow, they travelled to Washington. They met Gorbachev, they addressed a congressional hearing, they went to the Bolshoi Ballet, and Clara tells this incredible story about Emma was blind, so there were these ballerinas who were dancing in the Bolshoi Ballet, and she could hear the music, and she told Emma during all of it what costumes they were wearing and how they were dancing and how beautiful it was. It's a really beautiful story. And again, you don't hear their names being mentioned about heroes of our peace process. These women were talking about banning a bullet being used by the state that was killing civilians, and they were taking that around the world, but it wasn't being valued. So there was something about that, and of course they were the founder members of the organisation I work for. Amongst others, they founded an organisation called Relatives for Justice, supporting people who were bereaved and injured through the conflict, and raising really important issues around state violence and collusion during conflict. But essentially at the core of what you're saying is, and you can't do that unless you also support the families. So a family can't go to an inquest or can't go and address the media and can't talk about their experiences unless they have support, unless you're addressing the trauma that they're feeling and experiencing. And they brought that just practical knowledge and approach to our organisation that at that stage was very unique, because at that stage you really had campaign voices or you had support services, and the merging of those together, and of course there were other people who were involved in those decisions, but particularly Clara and Emma pushed that from very early on. And I think it's very noticeable that they're not mentioned or talked about today. But again, it's about working class women and living in the Republican community, and it's often obliterated when stories are told. I suppose the other thing that I wanted to talk about was the Good Friday Agreement. When it was being commemorated earlier this year, it was really obvious that women weren't mentioned during that commemoration. And if they were, it was Monica McWilliams, or the Women's Coalition, or it was Mo Mullen, who had passed away as the Secretary of State at the time. The other women who were absolutely involved in the Good Friday Agreement were not mentioned, or the communities that were led by women that supported the support toward the Good Friday, the referendum on the Good Friday Agreement, weren't mentioned. And I think that was really instructive to all of us about why, if you don't highlight and value the women at the time, in the roles that they're playing at the time, then they will be written out of history. So it's about what do we notice, what do we value, and ensuring that they are written in now, and that women are written in now and in the future, so that in the future we can recognise these are actually the roles that women played. And it's about noticing. At the moment we have a consultation on dealing with the past. It doesn't recognise women in it at all. It recognises people who have been killed and investigations for it and telling the truth about it, and they're included in it. But the reality is that 91% of those who were killed were men. So that means that women, if they're engaged in these processes or examined by these processes, will only be there as eyewitnesses or next of kin. It won't be examining the harms that women experienced during the conflict itself. So there's a whole skewing around that. And that's really important, because if we're going to learn lessons around our conflict, and these processes are meant to ensure that it never happens again, and we have excluded the harms that women experienced during our conflict, then we will have excluded a huge, something that's so vitally important. But it's because the women's experience during our conflict is not recorded, it is not noticed, and it isn't appreciated. And it's something that does need remedy. And I think it will also diminish our understanding of the conflict itself. And that's why my final point is structure is so important. If we don't build it into policy, that we notice women, and we notice where women are at and appreciate it, then it will go unappreciated. And that's just it. So a physical example of that would be the Mhic site. When a debate was happening around the preservation of the site for historical memory and ensuring we appreciate the experience of those that were there, the experience that was appreciated was that of the prisoners who were there, which is understandable, and in particular the hunger strikers, when Paul Butler ensured that there was a move to preserve the hospital wing of the Kesh site, which was absolutely vital. And also then, once that happened, there was an insertion of, well, there were all these men who were working as prison officers during that time, and their experience needs to be included, and that was completely appreciated. The first buildings that were taken down were the Visits and the Quaker Centre. Hundreds of thousands of women and children went through those centres. And their experience was just as important as the men who went through those years, because they had another experience of that imprisonment. On the outside, yes, but it was very much part of the prison story and how this community and other communities experienced those years of conflict with the prisons. But that was obliterated, physically obliterated. So had there been a concentration or a policy that said we need to appreciate women's experience, so things like that wouldn't happen, then that would have changed it. So it needs to be a statutory policy and a community policy, and we need to be aware and value. So they're my kind of thoughts, and I hope that helps the discussion.
When I initially saw the title of this, I think of the civil rights, I think of the 60s and the 70s, and my first port of call was actually to a woman, and that was my mother. And anybody who knows my mother knows she's a fantastic historian, but she's also a great hoarder of all written works, anything that came in through the door. And anybody who was here during the 70s and 80s knows that an awful lot of things came through your door, pamphlets, leaflets from political parties, from this group, that group, and she kept all of them. So I went down to her and I said, tell me something about the civil rights, because I was quite young back then. And she said to me, so after discussing it with her, she gave me a mountain of stuff that I actually meant to bring with me here today. And I left when I was trying to get the kids out to school this morning, I left it by the front door. And as the kids do to you. So I'm not as prepared as everybody else. I've left it all in the house. But having spoken to her, there was some materials in there that I want to talk about. That's relevant in particular to the Irish language community over the years, and things that I noticed looking at pamphlets that were produced, say in 1972, right to the Good Friday Agreement in 1998, and even as far as 2006, and there is a recurring thing, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But the more I spoke to her, the more she said to me, it was not about the civil rights, she said that you need to be focusing on. She says it is about a rights-based something that you need to look at, but it is about the Irish language, and she gave me a lot of materials on that. But then the more I thought about it, the more I thought she's the type of woman. So when you think of women and what they've achieved and they've done for their communities, there's a story, apologies to anybody in the room who's heard this story about my mother before, but I think it does sum up a sort of something that they have within them in these communities. And this story is about my mother, which was in her late teens. And this would have been in the 50s in Belfast. So you imagine the 50s in Belfast was a fairly grim place. And she lived in the Lower Falls. She lived in a street, I don't think it's there anymore, called Raglan Street, down by St Peter's Cathedral. And her father had died years before. Her mother was very, very poor and wasn't an educated. My grandmother couldn't really read and write very, very well, worked in the mills. And being a widow, she had very money. The children were really were raised by the neighbours really, so that she could go and earn money. But when my mother was in her late teens, a man came to Belfast and was giving a talk in the local library, the Falls Library. So she went along to listen to this man, and he was talking. Now she knew Irish at the time, and she listened. He was from Dublin. And she listened to this man talk, and he explained to the audience how he managed to learn Irish within a year by going to a class every night of the week. So my mother came away from this event and thought, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to be a fluent Irish speaker inside a year, and I'm going to find a class in Belfast. Can you imagine, 1950s, one night a week. So she went around all of Belfast every night. She found a class in the city centre, she found another class in West Belfast, and then she found a class over in North Belfast in a place she can't quite remember. It was on the Crumlin Road, it's called Northern something. I think everywhere in North Belfast is called Northern something. So she found this class and she was delighted. So she had 3 classes and she thought to herself, well, that's a start, I'll start learning Irish. So she started going to these classes 3 every week. And she noticed something odd about the one in North Belfast, because she said every week she went in, they were saying their Padraig, their prayers. And after about the third week of this, she thought, well, what's with the prayers? We all know our prayers from school anyway, and that should have been her first clue. We all know our prayers anyway from school, coming back, right? And she was going to these classes, and then on the 4th week she went along, she went up to the classroom, it was on the 3rd floor of a building. She went up to the classroom and there was nobody there. And she wandered around and found nobody, and she knew there was another organisation on the middle floor, so she went down the stairs and she went knocked on the door, and there was a man there, and she said, what happened to the Irish class up the stairs? And they don't seem to be there this week. And the man said to her, Irish class? You're not in that Irish class, are you? And she turned around, it was all males in this Irish class, and she turned around and said, yeah, I am in that Irish class. And he looked at her and he says, well, love, he says, they were all arrested the other day, they're up to no. This wasn't an Irish class at all. This was a cancel an Irish class. That was our first experience of what goes on in Belfast and what people do in order to hide other things away. So I think she had a lucky escape on that particular occasion. But she did go on to learn Irish fluently. I don't know whether she managed it quite in 1 year, but then with coming to an hour, she started to write. So they started to run cycling, Irish speaking cycling clubs and so on, and that's where she met my father. And then when I was a teenager, I used to think of my father as somebody, wow, look, everything he's done, and I used to have him on a bit of a pedestal. Probably more so because I was his favourite and the rest of them say that. I always used to think I was, because of a certain story about raspberry ruffles, which I won't tell today, but he loved his raspberry ruffles. When after my father had been shot in the Troubles, he had to change jobs because the shooting had left the nerve endings in one of his arms damaged, and he was a mechanic. He was a diesel mechanic, and he had to give that job up because he couldn't work with his fingers properly. So he became a black taxi driver, and he would be out of the house. I remember as a child, he was out of the house from first thing in the morning till late in the evening, and we hardly ever saw him. Every weekend he would be working terminally. And I used to think, and then they were building up the Bunsko Forest. So this is in the 70s. We shot in 1974, November 1974, which was a particularly tough year here in relation to the Troubles. An awful lot of people killed. We were lucky that he wasn't one of those. He worked morning, noon and night, and that's what we all remember from that period, is that Daddy was never in the house. And I used to think with the Bunsko, survived. The Bunsko did incredibly well during those years. There were tough decisions for that community to make in relation to the school, in relation to the Pobail that they were building up. And I used to think, how in God's name did he do that? How did he go out? Because I wouldn't see him in the morning. He would be away. He would be away before any of us got up, and he wouldn't be back till late at night. We were all away to bed. And how did he manage that? How did they keep the shots from the school and everything? And then it occurred to me, I think, when I was in my early 20s, that it wasn't about him at all. It was about the women of the Shaw's Road and what they had, because they were the ones, because he was away, he was out taxiing up and down the road all day long. So they actually dealt with the problems. And you're absolutely right, nobody talks about that at the time. Nobody talked about that because what we were doing, where we were seeing this going on around us, and we thought it was the men. Even as children, we thought it was the men. But when you start to analyse it and look back on it, you know that it couldn't have been. That it had to have been the women who were there day in, day out. And of course, my mother was in the Bunsko teaching, as were some of the other women of the Shaw's Road, and they put together the materials. They were there to deal with the day-to-day problems. When there was a problem with the child, they had to. When there was a problem with the teacher didn't want to come in again because the soldiers were on the Shaw's Road. No, I'm afraid I don't want it. And when the poor teacher from Donegal, who they had have decided, right, I've had enough, those troubles are getting, I'm way back to the same Jim Donegal. It was the women that picked up the pieces of all of that. And I understand that, and I can see it, and I've seen that now for a lot of years, but I agree entirely with what you have to say about women and their role and how underplayed it is. Because actually would anything get done without them? And the Shaw's Road is maybe an example of that. Men can certainly make the decisions and they're good at standing up and saying, right, but then that has to be backed up by something, and that is often, very, very often as women. And especially when it's something like Irish language or civil rights. And I was going to talk quickly before I hand over to Ashley about the leaflets that I found. So there was a leaflet that was included in the pile that she gave me. It was 1972, and it was the Reverend Martin Smith, and he had written a pamphlet about why it was really a myth that there was discrimination in housing, why there was a myth that there was discrimination in employment, and why we should be anti everything Irish, the Irish language and everything. And there was a little pamphlet, and it had a heart on the front with the Union Jack in the middle of the heart. And this was, when you read it, it's incredible, and you actually gasp and you go, oh, these people actually believe this stuff. Or maybe they didn't believe it, but they certainly said it and wrote it down and put it through people's letterboxes. But then there was another leaflet, and this time it was an Ulster Unionist Party leaflet that a lot of us, and I can remember this one, this was during the Good Friday Agreement referendum, and they were asking you to vote yes, and again it was blue and it had a Union Jack on it, and when you opened it up this way there was a picture of David Trimble and his wife and children on the inside, and it gave you 7 or 8 reasons why you should vote yes in the referendum. And number 4 or 5 on that leaflet, and this is 1998 now, I have to remember, and what it said was, you vote yes for the referendum because it will mean that people won't be forced to speak Irish. Now that was part of the referendum back then. So you had Martin Smith back in 72 giving off about everything Irish and why the Irish needed to, and the Irish language needed to stay out of the North. And then in 1998, you had the same nonsense from them. And then in 2006, there was another leaflet, I don't know who wrote it, somebody on the Union side, and again they were ranting and raving about the Irish language initiative. So in relation to civil rights, there's a lot achieved, but there's still a lot of work to be done. And the Irish language seems to be the one that is it's their boogeyman. It really, it genuinely is. And there's another quick story I'm going to say about my daughter. Up until 6 months ago, my youngest daughter is 11 years old. She believed that there was a monster lived under her bed. And she genuinely believed that there was somebody under her bed. There was this guy who was brushing under the bed, and the brush caught something. And I looked under the bed, and she had managed to go up to the 3rd floor where the old cot that she used to lie in was dismantled up against the wall. And she brought the cot side all the way down from the 3rd floor. She had put books underneath it in a pile, and she had put it on top, right? And I said, why did you do that? And she says, well, she says, it means that if he's there, I hear, because it rocked, you see, you're trying to lie on it. I hear the rattle, and I know he's definitely there. And number 2 is very uncomfortable to sleep on, so maybe he'll find somebody else somewhere else. And my attitude was, oh, for goodness sake, there is no monster underneath your bed. And I said, Paul, talk to her, there's no monster underneath her bed, because you couldn't get her to sleep any night. So Paul went in, and Paul said something very interesting to her. He said, what he said to her, he says, instead of laying traps for the monster or the boogeyman, you have to make peace with it. Because in your head you have to decide, well, he's not going to be harmful to me, and I thought immediately of the Irish language, and that's their boogeyman. And instead of laying traps for it, instead of trying to trip it up or make it unsteady, try and deal with it and make peace with it in some way, because actually it's only in their head, it's not really under the bed, it's actually more. So I thought that was quite, and that was from a non-Irish speaker. He was speaking, he was able to reason with her better than I was. So on that note,
So really fui matani hen. Ni starry me so Neil so KV Parchak or Rodamine or Rodala. I'm just going to talk about my own experience. I came from a really matriarchal family, mostly because all of the men were in prison or dead. So my granny ran the show, and my mum raised me as a single parent. So that's what my own experience is. And yesterday, I was here for Charlie and Bella for the launch of the Bella, and the guest speaker was Jerry Adams, and he was talking about Sean McGill, and he called him a practical patriot. And that struck me as a good description of almost every woman I know. Women who are doing things on a very practical basis. I have been listening to the radio the other day when I was making the dinner, and that song, Sisters of the Willows, came on, and the start bit of it was like, behind every great man is a great woman, but that's no longer the case, because now women are doing it for themselves. And I thought, well, first of all, here, that's still the case, behind every great man is a great woman. And it's also, they're wrong, because I don't think sisters are doing it for themselves. In my experience, they're doing it for everybody else. All the women I know are doing something for their families or their community. They're not specifically doing it for the glory of themselves. I'm also not saying that that's the case for men. I don't think that either. But I don't think we're becoming doctors and lawyers just for our own, to fill our own pockets and to say how wonderful we are. Almost every woman I know is doing something for a cause outside of themselves, and that, I think, relates to what you're talking about there about all those women who don't get any recognition. And a lot of times I think it's because we maybe don't seek it out. That's not our agenda. We're not doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for somebody else. And in my experience, it is really about growing up within a community in West Belfast, but also being part of an Irish language community. And there's loads of women who have had a massive impact on me who no one has ever heard of. Apart from, like I was saying, my own granny who kept our family together when all of her sons were in jail and her husband was dead, and all my aunties who worked to keep the family going and to keep all those men in the best whatever bodies were out at the time. From all of the letters that I found in the house from prison, most of it was like, Ma, can you get me a new Adidas or whatever? And my mummy, who raised me on her own, but also ran a wee youth club in the house next door to us, and was never recognised for it, and put me through Irish language education when nobody else in our family was doing that. But also my own experience is like Kiva said, I was on Forbairt, which was still more or less in its infancy at the time. It was run by a woman. Anya was the pre-Aoidh. My reader was the Rooney, and it took me about 20 years to realise that Myra's name was Aoidh and not Myra Rooney. Because that's what I literally thought her name was Myra Rooney. And Thomas Auntie Kathleen, who run the dinners and employed my mummy as a dinner lady, and those women basically kept the place going. Those were the people who I saw in school, and maybe it's because I came from a matriarchal family, so I wasn't really, I recognised the women and what they did. Almost all my teachers were women, except for Diarmid, who I had the pleasure of having in P6 and P7. And the moisture, on the moisture. No messing with the moisture. Paul, who pretty much just taught us football, as far as I can remember. But it was all women who were about, and that did not seem unusual to me. And then when I went on to Forbairt, my form teacher was Barbara de Bruyne, who was another activist, and a very intelligent woman, multilingual. And I also had Ruth de Blenia and Noreen Nicleary, who was loads of crack. A Ruth who's still there. But also there were all of the other women who were there all the time, especially at the weekend, and they're mostly all parents, and some of them are in this room. And these women, plus the likes of my mummy, were there playing the school at the weekends, and the school and all that sort of stuff. But then within the entire building, which is Culturdan, still Culturdan, there were other people like Myra Nickonachty, who was running the cafe, and Liz Hartley and Pauline and Brage and Martina and all those women who were not only keeping the show going but keeping the crack going as well. You probably remember that, do you? And then, you know, in the shop, Anya, Nick Yarald, so who's still running the shop and has been in the Culturdan from the very start and is now the chair of our board. He does a Trojan amount of work, stuff that people don't even realise she's doing, and is never ever recognised in any way. Never see anybody, and she never puts herself forward because she doesn't want to. She just wants to do it for what she's doing it for. So I have had all of these women be part of my life and being an inspiration to me, and they're sort of the people that you're trying to look up to and trying to emulate, which isn't easy, and especially if you have a family. And then there's all the women who are behind the great man, who are keeping all of the men who are doing important work in our community going by helping out with keeping the house going. I don't know how to do it. It's really insane. They deserve medals, but again, they won't be recognised. I think if Pobail na Gaeilge, Tamil, Mormra, and a lot of them actually aren't Irish speakers or learned Irish or supporting something because they believe in it, but they might not necessarily be Gaelbroy. Like my mum can't speak the word Irish, and nobody in my family can speak a word Irish except for the few words that my uncles learned in jail, or prayers. Not that anybody goes in my family goes to mass anymore, but they still know the prayers. But that's all the generations of people who I know growing up. What actually really Nadine Sprague and maybe Smo and people who really impress me now are all of the young women who are about doing work in the community now. All the people who are younger than me or my age. It blows me away how intelligent they are and how capable they are, and also how they're a wee bit less behind the door than maybe I would have been or the generation before would have been, in saying what it is they do and what they deserve and what their rights are, and being really smart and running their own businesses and running organisations like this. Like I was struck yesterday by Aoidh, who was giving her speech here for the opening of the festival, and right before she was doing that, was going around asking everybody did they want a cup of tea. So you're always playing this dual role of like helping people out, but at the same time you have to be the face of something, or you have to be the speaker, and I think that is something that women do really well. Whether or not it's fair that women do that, it's what happens, and without any hope or want for recognition. I'm not saying I do that myself. Do my best, like, but I wouldn't be on the same level. I don't have my own family, for example, that I have to look after, so I wonder like how women who are running organisations can also look after their families and doing that. And I actually think maybe it's because not only are we not doing it for ourselves, and you know, behind every great man is a great woman, but I actually think behind every great woman is loads of other great women, and men as well. And it's not an exclusive thing, but I think we support each other, and that's what keeps it going, and that's what makes us a community.
Okay.
So I'm conscious of time, but I was coming here and asked you a the Jane earlier, and I want to open it up for a couple of questions to the floor. But before we do that, just Louis Shifter and Tionchar after hiring of his role the man is Tionchar. So these three of you have mentioned this in particular, and the role of women in this particular area. And we'll do an early Tionchar to Hirava, Labhraí Harla, Lilina Labhraí. Do you think that we, the women in this area, have a particular strength in given that what has happened in terms of our history, in terms of the troubles, and the fact that, as you mentioned, a lot of the men were in prison and the women were kind of, my granny always used to say, the men were all right, they were getting their meals, but we were the ones that had to rear all the children and gun run and everything else my granny was at. So, you know, but, so, we'll do our leg, we'll lie drop our leg, will we?
Sheila
She'll go, she'll go ra, again, all the time, I think all over women tend to be problem solvers, in that if there's a problem, they'll find a way around it. And particularly when the chips are down. I remember whenever I finished the bun school here, there was no man's school or college as far as you would go to. We were sent 100 miles down the road to school in Dublin. Believe it or not, mad parents that I have who sends their child 100 miles down the road for school. But the more I become, when I get to an adult, I thought, what sort of parents did I have? Who does that? I don't know. But we were sent down the road to Dublin for school, and I remember the school was very middle class. It was class basic in Oregon in South Dublin. It was very nice. And the rest of the pupils were definitely from a different community to me. I hated Dublin, I hated College East again. I was Belfast born and bred, and I couldn't settle there. But I remember at the school there was a family, Mhic and Shan O'Galley, and he had his daughters Crina and Ashley, who was in my class, and Neve, who actually didn't settle in college to East again any better than me, but they were from an area in Dublin called Colma, and it would have been very like West Belfast. I would have, because when I went to Colma, we stayed in a part of Dublin. We went up and down on the train every Friday. Friday and Sunday we were on the train home to Belfast, because both my parents worked in Belfast and had to earn money to send us to school in Dublin, because it wasn't cheap. But their wish for us was to have an Irish medium education, and they had to work in order for us to go to Dublin. And whenever we stayed in a park called Rama, which was full of students, and it was okay. But when Crina and Ashley would invite us to their home in Crumlin, I felt at home again. It was like crossing that. There's a river that runs along at Crumlin, just outside it, and as you would walk along it, it was a feeling came over me like I'm almost going home to Belfast. It's the same sort of community, the same sort of feeling, and when you enter the Galley home, the person that was closest to me in Dublin, probably closer that I thought of as a mother, was probably Crina's mother, because she was that quintessential Dubliner and Dublin mother, and you went in and she always, where she got food out of, I don't know, because I know they didn't have any money, and she would feed us endlessly, and you would come into the house and there would be food coming at you all the time, and she would the crack out of her was incredible. And then Shan was quite reserved, her father was quite reserved, and was a lovely man who was a passionate Republican, but also a very, very passionate Irish figure. And I belonged in that house in some way. And I think what you're saying, so I think it exists in Dublin, and it exists in West Belfast.
Class issue rather than...
It is. And I'm not even sure we go as far as that, actually. I think sometimes when the chips are down, in whatever way, the women stand out as the stronger of the two, definitely. And I think you'll find that the world over. I think maybe it's our hardships then that do probably bring out those qualities that we admire. And it's certainly in West Belfast because of what West Belfast has experienced. But I'm sure you find it in North Belfast and in some of those areas, and areas like the Short Strand, you'll find this as well. The same sort of women you brought in those houses, and in Dublin, and in my brother lives in Cork, parts of Cork that I live in. So yeah.
Andrée,
Yeah, I know colleagues and Crina and Ashley in particular, and I think that there's something about Republican women too, right? Because then, you're in Dublin, and not everyone in Dublin is Republican by any sort, or understood how the conflict kind of was taking place. Not so you were in a home that did and cared, and that was different, I think, probably from most of Dublin, and was probably a bit of a class thing. I think that conflict offers opportunities for women to assume roles that wouldn't be there in the absence of conflict. And I think that that's something that is worth looking at. In terms of, because men are absent, so women are able to assume those roles. And what's interesting then is what happens when the conflict's over, right? And who assumes back into what roles and how the grassroots politics that was so enveloping in, certainly when I moved up in '94 and in maybe the 10 years afterwards, that has probably changed since then, right? And there is a displacing, I think, of those really strong women's voices that were there to something different now, right? And I'm not doing a big judgment thing in that, but it's different. And I think that's worth noticing. Underneath that, working class women in areas where they have to fight tooth and nail to put food on the table or to fight the authorities for whatever it is, I think does produce, you hear about those strong women who have to do that, and I think that's really important. And then of course, the women in this community are fighting the British state and fighting their might in every form, whether militarily, politically, culturally. They were getting it from every dimension, and they stood up against that and won. And that's an incredible story, really, to be told, and not to be diminished in any way. And they did it by being really practical and stepping into the roles that needed to be played, while also making sure that the kids were washed and coping with all of the trauma that was going on around the time, and not to diminish that either. There were plenty of people who weren't coping, but there were other people who were supporting people who weren't coping, and it's an incredible story.
Why don't I ask Mhic if anyone has any questions? We're tight on time, but maybe we could squeeze in a couple of quick ones. Yesterday, Brona?
Just to make a really question, you mentioned a role for Pat, so I've been on the play, I think it was a fantastic discussion, so I do think it's just another round of applause for everyone. What recommendations would you have in terms of instilling that, self-worth and confidence? Because obviously, when you're a teenager, like I know myself, it's a critical time for your own self-confidence, and the society around you, sometimes you're getting conflicting messages. So what are the recommendations you would have for our young people coming through? That long-winded Goldie Maleshka.
Just courage on it here. I mean, we're a honey miss freezing skull, the with your fads around Kian and Gasser was calling you Martanish, it was being stuck going around to get the botanies boo. But Jerry grew a goni adventure it's come out Aoidh and Rod go home, but the topicy area beneath mBan on Fahanya na Gassery. So Red Mishik, Gaelic Star was Berla, the was your father Procam, Gaelic father Procam, and I say it's Star. It's kind of like her mouth to be further than the name around them. The niece mBan or na Gassery or in Star, August, the Plé-phainéil going on around the Suginia, either na Gassery, in Star, August could be Rodella. So what he knows, she really lives your fad, what he's far, not very linear, and it's a star, we lives your fad. Take her does it, really? We would review with John or Gay Case, and I was in all, I will be able to play fad and lads. I'm going to be able to cover, and Kevin, she was going to be, because we choose when you're daddy, I was, when we were talking about history, just I'm saying it within my class in school, and I'm just being incredible within my class in school. There was a split between the boys and the girls, and the boys used to sit together and talk about all the wars and probably what they would have did differently and how they would have planned this and that and the other thing, and that really didn't really include girls. I'm not saying you were excluding girls, I'm just saying you just weren't part of that conversation. And still doing it anything to do with history or to do with war and all these great achievements were often left out of the conversation. So I just think learn it and wish I had it done and tried, but I've never had a head for dates. Argue back and know your own voice. who else is. And then also, that's not your bag, you're not interested in history, whatever you're good at, that's what you push. It's exactly as valuable to know how to do about maths or science or art. The guy working in a community arts centre, and I'm often find that people don't value the arts as much as they value if you're really good at maths or computers or whatever. But whatever it is you're good at, that's what you're good at. Push it. It doesn't matter what it is, whatever you're passionate about. Whether you're a young woman or a young man. Also, we're not competing against each other. You know, we're all here to help each other out. You know, you all the women here have brothers or fathers or whatever, and all the men here have sisters or mothers. You know, just as long as we're all supporting each other and value whatever each other's good at, can't go wrong.
Pobail, Tionchar, Mhic, sure. One more question and then we'll maybe call it a day. No more questions? That's good, relax. Okay, well, I'm going to while we history to go election family trust, so Andrée, Colma, of a session. There's loads of really great activities in the programme, so have a wee check out. Agus míle buíochas sa brúna agus í focus or the